all of us. Where it comes from, that we can debate, and if it's right, what it's based on, people can discuss it. But the fact is, it is definitely there, and it is there in all human cultures. Everybody has this somehow, this moral voice that is there within us, and how to deal with it. That's what we will take a look at tonight, because it is very relevant for the spiritual practitioner. We saw that in previous cultures, obviously, there was a big connection between morality and religion. The two things are very much related. So morality drew its basis from religion. For example, if we look at the classic moral instance of the Ten Commandments, so where it was revealed unto humankind at that specific time what is right and what is wrong. And then for thousands of years, over 2,000 years, that was the basis of most people's conscience. Their conscience was tuned in. They decided what is right or wrong based on what they were taught, from the Bible. So one cannot underestimate the power of that. And even the Bible, it was such a simple moral code, but you have to understand that it was, at that time, was revolutionary. Like nowadays, murder is something quite shocking. It wasn't such a shocking thing at a certain point. It was not something, it still happens quite frequently, but it wasn't like, there's certain things that used to happen in different times of human society that people always understand it's right or wrong, but society also goes through different phases of moral awareness. Like now, for example, say, even a government is very limited in what the level of pain it can inflict on people. Say torture, we see it's a bad thing. At a certain point, it was just like capital punishment. These things was just the order of the day, and it wasn't so long ago even. So it is interesting how society's moral sensitivities, it shifts also with the ages. And usually, if we look at different stages of cultures, then you would see there was oftentimes this law bringers that came, like Confucius, for example, in ancient Chinese culture, he came, and then it was like a big shift in that time, just understanding that there's certain moral rules, that if you follow them, there will be good results. Here we have a statue of Hammurabi. This is one of the first codes of law, and it's actually the top part of a big stone statue. It's about 7.5 feet that they uncovered. And you'll see at the bottom is actually text that's written. So the whole text of the laws of Hammurabi is written out in the Code of Hammurabi. And at the top, you see that there, the depiction is how Hammurabi, he received it from God, from the gods. So there's always been this connection between morality and religion. It's somehow the moral law is not just something that humans make up, it's something that is revealed to them from above. Now, if we would go either further back into history, then we find that, say, amongst the Egyptians, there was this concept, they called it Maat. So how, where it is explained that the same as when the world was created, the same principle that gives order to the world, like, right or wrong is not just a moral thing, it's this something that is everywhere. And that opposed to what is right or wrong, opposed to Maat, opposed to order, is chaos. And that this order is there within nature, and the human being, he also has his role to play. So he also has to somehow attune himself with this order that is there within the universe. And then from there, all good results will come. There's this intimate connection also then between fortune and auspiciousness in society and somehow abiding by, what is this moral law. And it's when at the end of life, then your heart will be weighed. So the soul is also understood to be situated within the heart. And then this goddess Maat, she is then, just like we have even in Western depictions of Lady Justice, this idea of this goddess who has a weighing scale. And she weighs the weight of your heart. How heavy is it? How much have you been able to imbibe this moral principle? And that determines then what is your the next destination of the soul. Now, obviously in the Vedic tradition also we have this idea of dharma. So dharma is almost exactly the same as this concept of Maat. The word dharma, it means, in one sense, the essence of something. So everything has its dharma. For example, the dharma of sugar is to be sweet. That is the nature of sugar. And the human being is interesting because amongst all creatures, he is the one creature that can, if he wants to, he can go against his dharma. That's a fascinating thing. See that animals, they just naturally follow their instincts. That's why animals, there's no real conception of right and wrong for an animal. It's like one animal just takes another animal, bites off its leg, and kills the whole family. And that's just that's what animals do. They're just following their instincts. But a human being is somehow able to either attune himself with what is right or wrong, and also, because human beings have the ability to do the greatest things, and also the ability to do the most horrible things, isn't it? That's the fascinating nature of humanity, that they have been bestowed with this freedom to either go against Dharma, or to embrace Dharma and fully show what it really is. Now, obviously this is very ancient ideas, and it's not strange ideas, but the modern world has taken a course in a very different direction. So, as religion has declined, religion and religion, specifically organized religion, has gone down. Also, society has become more secular. So nowadays, that especially since the increase in what we could call secular psychology, we have taken a whole different approach to what is right or wrong. Especially Sigmund Freud's ideas, we all know, the father of psychoanalysis. From him, the understanding came that this voice that you have in your head, what is right or wrong, it is simply something that is produced from your upbringing, simply rooted in the experiences that you had as a child. Specifically, you imbibe it from your father and from your mother, or from society. Especially Freud was quite vocal about how it is society that obviously, oftentimes it pressures this idea of what is good or bad upon the individual. And then from there you get the superego. So this idealized self of what you think you're supposed to be, that is always judging you. So, and that idea has had very serious consequences. So these ideas are powerful because nowadays many individuals, when you hear this voice of reason, of this voice of morality, what is right or wrong, then depending on what you think it is, you will treat it in a certain way. So for most of us in the modern world, at least, we definitely do not give it the same sense of seriousness or weight that someone in the ancient world will give it. It's there sometimes, and we know sometimes something's right or wrong, but we don't necessarily see it as something connected to this divine principle that will, it's much bigger than ourselves. No, we see it as sometimes you do something bad, you have a little bit of a guilty conscience, and then you just, take a drink or take some pills, and then you quiet it down. You don't have to worry about it. So we deal with it very differently due to how we perceive it. Now, we can have a whole session on, if you are, a very wonderful documentary series to watch is something called The Century of the Self. Anybody watch that? Century of the Self? I guess it's BBC. It's not really, I don't know, Americans watch BBC. So, Century of the Self is a very nice documentary series about the influence of Freud's ideas on society. And there's this one, the third episode, I believe, it's called, There is a Policeman in Our Head, and He Must Be Destroyed. And it's all about how, in the 60s, the counterculture, a large part of the counterculture was all about dismantling the effects of, it's about breaking free from the constraints of society. Because society seemed to be something that has become immoral. And then a large part of breaking free from society, it was seen that society is not just outside of you, it has entered into your head. It has taken over your head. And society is trying to tell you what is right or wrong. And that's how they actually control you. So a large part of the rebellion in that counterculture era was to break down this voice that is telling you what is right or wrong by actively going against it. So that had both good and bad consequences, because once one starts to mess with moral reason, it can become very heavy. So one thing that we see is that in certain individuals, the moral voice is conspicuous by its absence. There are certain people, we call them psychopaths, who have no connection whatsoever with conscience. When they make their decisions, they do what they do, it doesn't feature in. They don't hear it. They actually don't hear that voice that tells them what is right or wrong. Therefore, they also feel no guilt or no remorse. And I mean, I entered into that part of YouTube when I was researching, you know, when you start Googling like, you know, serial killers, no remorse or whatever, try to get some clips. I was just a little bit, and I was like, nah, it's too heavy. But I watched I watched this interview with Jeffrey Dahmer, you know, very interesting person. God, I mean, brutal. I mean, what he did was just amazing. He's killed about a serial killer in the, I think it was the 80s or something, maybe, I'm not sure, somewhere. And interesting person because he was very normal. He just looks like a normal American guy. He worked in a chocolate factory. You know? It's like, as normal as can be, you know. But he killed about maybe, I think, 20 or 18 people, and gruesomely, you know, like decapitated them and kept their limbs in his fridge and whatever. It was a little crazy. And but what's interesting is where it started. It started when he was a child, and it started with this fascination that he had for dead animals. The first time he saw a dead animal. And then he sort of played with it, and he wanted to see what's in there. And then he started to kill animals himself also, you know? And that's where it started. And at that point he knew it was wrong. He could feel this is not a good thing, because children are very sensitive. Interesting enough, children have oftentimes a more acute sensibility towards what is right or wrong. You know? You can see many children, the first time they encounter killing an animal, most kids, they will cry. You know? They will cry, or they will feel, somehow they feel that this is not a good thing. You know? But then if you do it repeatedly, it goes away. So that is the problem with conscious, is that it can go away. You know? And that's what you see oftentimes with people who become psychopaths, is that somehow it went away. They've numbed it down. They can't hear it anymore. And then they can do the most astounding things. Now, psychopath is one thing, because that is something a little unique. You know, that's unique. It's not every day that you get these people that do these grotesque things and somehow they can't be stopped. But a level of psychopathy is quite normal in modern day society, because it is oftentimes not this heavy perversion that can make us disconnected from the conscious. It is oftentimes just basic things like greed. Like greed, it's all over the place. People can do the most amazing things just because they want some money. So just to illustrate the principle, I want to show a nice, well, I don't know if it's nice, but it's a little video clip from another BBC series by a person called Louis Theroux. Ever heard of Louis Theroux? So he's an interesting guy. He does these, he somehow has this fascination with the fringe, you know, like with fringe people. So he like would go to all kinds of strange places and, you know, interview people and find out what they're doing and how they do it. And he once went to South Africa to investigate the crime situation in South Africa. So I'm from South Africa, so I know how it goes there. And he was shocked, because in South Africa you get crazy stuff that happens. It really is just, you cannot imagine. Like, you went to downtown Joburg, and there what they do is, sometimes they hijack buildings. You know? So there's like a big skyscraper, and then they go in, they hijack it, so they take the top floor, and then they go and knock on all the residents, and then they tell them that you have to pay rent to us now. So you pay rent to us. And then obviously the owner of the skyscraper, he's like, I mean, he's not gonna pay the bills anymore. So then they cut off the electricity and the water, but you know, life goes on. And the police are not willing to go in because these guys are loaded. You know, they have like so many guns. Police is like, we're not gonna go in and get shot to get your building back. So then there's other private insurance companies. You have to hire them. And then they basically go in and kill the guys. So, you know, you pay them a lot of money, and then they go in and take the hijacked building back. But it's risky because, you know, it's like not easy because they're obviously sitting up there and they're like fortified. So Louis Theroux went to these, and he was just like, you could see, he couldn't believe it, you know. So at a certain point he was going to interview some just hard gangsters, you know, just some hard criminals. And he met these two guys. So I just want to show this as an example of people who have lost touch with a basic understanding of what is right or wrong, and not because they're necessarily heavily perverted like Jeffrey Dahmer, but just simply for money. So check this out.
What was the last thing you did, you two?
We took 4 cars last night.
Last night, where?
Yes, in Benoni.
In Benoni?
Yes, we're waiting for Bayari now.
You're waiting for a buyer.
Maybe.
How did you get them?
We take it with a gun. What can we do? Only money that I want.
And to hurt people?
Yeah, the people, I will show you with your last born. If you don't want to give me a man, I will show you with your last born. Took him to shower or to the hot shower. I like to show you there I want money. Or to the oven, micro oven. I put it like this to the oven. Then you see I want money.
If I've got a child there, you say you would hurt the child to find out the information?
Put your child, I put it in oven. I make oven on.
You wanna give us?
You never give me. You never give me. Or I took your wife, I put it, I take your wife, I put a knife here. Like, example, you see the blood. I say, I finish up now. You don't give me money or you give me. What can you say? You will give me. No other way.
Is he serious? I can't tell him if when he's joking.
These people are cruel. You know, they're cruel. Last week's paper, I don't remember what page. His face, Malevolent's face was there. They wanted. His face was on the paper. But they don't care. They feel folk are living to kill somebody.
Home sweet home. So, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is a near vice verse that explains how he calls it the gates to hell. So hell in the Vedic there's something like hell, but it's not like an eternal destination that you end up and you burn there forever. No, it is something that you yourself create, because by the law of karma, whatever you do in this life, you create your future destination. So it's a state of consciousness that you create for yourself. And then you can get stuck there. And then it's very difficult to get out, Because you can imagine for someone like that, how difficult would it be? Imagine, how can he have a wife and children, for example? Like a normal experience, how would it be possible for him to just live a normal kind of life after one has sort of adopted that state of consciousness? And now it's very difficult to get out of that. You can get many lifetimes, actually, to become purified in that state of mind. So Krishna explains that Trividam Narakasyedam, Dvaram, there are these three gates leading to this hell, to this condition which the soul can be bound up. And it is simply lust, anger, and greed. So it's not foreign things, very simple things that we all also face to a certain degree. But if it becomes too accentuated, too intense, it has the ability to completely overpower any moral sensibility that you have. And then it becomes very dangerous. So then Krishna explains, every sane man, if you're just sane, then you should rather give these things up, because they lead to a degraded situation that will cause a lot of suffering for yourself ultimately also. And that's the thing. It's not just this person. You can imagine people like that. It's not just they themselves. It's not suffering they cause to others. They themselves are also deeply unhappy, deeply in a deeply fearful condition. I know one friend of mine, I've spoken about him before once in this class, but he used to be a gangster, like a hardcore gangster. And he was a bowler at our house, and he became friends with my father. So my father is like an ex-policeman, a big guy. He's about as tall as I am, but weighs much more. He's like a very big, solid, old cop. And then there's this guy who's an ex-gangster, and he's very tiny. He's probably like 5 foot something, And his whole face like covered with tattoos. Somehow they became good friends. And he is such an interesting story because he went to prison for murder. But in prison, he just became completely reformed. Not by the prison process, whatever, but just by the suffering, by that painful. He decided that he wants nothing to do with his life anymore, And afterwards, he's very wise. There's certain kind of wisdom that comes from people that have been through great misery, and have walked through on the other side, and have somehow kept themselves intact. So he's very wise and he's very gentle, because he is very much averse now to causing any kind of pain. That's like his big thing. Because he has experienced so much himself. So he just has no desire to cause pain to anything, because he knows how it feels. So that's actually how karma works, is that when you experience what you give to others, then you can become very sensitive, because then you know how it feels. Yeah? And that's the basis of compassion, is actually being able to know how it feels. So, very wonderful person, and now he's such a wonderful person. So we see that this principle of karma is not meant to punish people, but to ultimately help people become compassionate. Now, conscience is very interesting, because we see the lack of conscience has serious results. But then also, it is the same conscience that can lead people to do great things, great things. Here I made a little bit of a collage of people that were just ordinary people. What these people all have in common is they were just normal people that somehow were in extraordinary conditions. And then they became heroes. Huh? Not because they did something amazing, but all of them, somehow or other, they saved many, many people. But they weren't looking for it. It is just something that came onto them. For example, in that top left corner, we have Chihune Sugihara, who is a famous Japanese bureaucrat, ultimately. It was during the Second World War. He was the governor in Lithuania. Because Japanese, actually, at a certain point, they controlled Lithuanian territory. And he saved thousands of Jews who were fleeing from the occupied countries. Just because he was in power. He was politically, he was a normal Japanese, just a government man. But somehow he couldn't turn these people away, and he just let them in and saved many of them at great personal cost. If it was caught, it was finished, then he would be executed, his whole family was out. We see at the bottom right corner, there's this lady called Zura Karuhimbi. So she was in Rwanda during the Rwandan genocide, which happened in the 90s, when the Hutus and the Tutsis, so two opposing clans, there was a big civil war, and then it was for a few days. It was just hundreds and thousands, a few million people actually died in a few days, and it was just it's quite something to read about it. It's just something that bursts open. Sometimes it's like everything seems normal, and then it's just this thing that burst. And then it was just completely crazy. And the government was obviously also into it, the military supported it, and they just killed millions of people, just slaughtered them on the street. And a few of them, there's a very famous movie, Hotel Rwanda, about it, which was made about one man, who also saved many people. And this lady also, she was like a herb doctor, like a witch doctor kind of thing. And then she just sheltered all these Tutsis in her hut. And then whenever the Hurus would come looking for people, she would just act like she's completely crazy. And she would tell them, if you come into this house, the ghost, I'm going to freaking curse you. So she would dress all kinds of strange stuff. So then they were like, okay, just leave this lady alone, go somewhere else. So she also saved many, many people. And the rest of them are a collection of photos from a project that was called The Rescuers, which was done about 20, 30 years after the Holocaust. And it was done by a Jewish rabbi. He commissioned a group of people to go look for all the Europeans, just the normal European people, who saved many Jews. And they're all Germans. It's all normal German people. Just some are others. Some of them are Polish, but just normal Europeans who had no problem in the war in one sense. They were just normal white people, so they weren't being persecuted or anything. But they sheltered or gave protection to Jewish people. And then here, in the bottom, that impressive guy with a military uniform, his name is Witold Pilecki. So his story is very fascinating. He was a Polish soldier, but what happened to him is that at a certain point, when they had the whole Auschwitz camp, they didn't know exactly what was happening in there. So it was a massive camp. There was, at a certain point, about 30,000 people at a certain point was kept. That was big. It's a big camp, but they didn't know exactly what was happening there. And then he volunteered. He volunteered to be caught, so to have Jewish papers on him, and then be caught outside bounds in Poland. But he was a Roman Catholic. He was just a normal Roman Catholic guy. So he himself wasn't Jewish. And then he got caught and sent to Auschwitz to see what was happening in there. So he volunteered for that mission. So then he went in there. He was in there for about 2 years. And then he gave some morale, and he tried to organize things, and he gave some information. And then he broke out. He busted out. It was like quite a prison break. And he got out of there. And then he obviously gave the information, and he tried his best to to address what was happening in there. And then later, after the war ended and Poland fell to the communists, then he fought against communist rule. And then at the end, he was ultimately caught. And he was then sentenced to death. He was sentenced to death for treason. And, just like a mock trial. Obviously, it wasn't the real trial that happened. Obviously, you're going to get killed, but they do like a mock trial. And then at the end, when they asked him if he has any final words, and the whole time he was just sitting very peaceful in the court, and then he just stood up and he said his whole life, he has simply tried to lead his life in such a way that in his last hour, that he could feel joy and not fear. It was like his final word, and then he sat down. And then everybody in the court is just like, they didn't know what to say. So what an amazing person. But what all these people have in common, all of them have in common, is that if you would ask them why they did what they did, all of them share one thing in common, is that they simply did it because they felt they had to. None of them claim that they did something heroic. They said that they simply felt from their conscience, they felt what was the right thing to do, and they simply acted on that. And they didn't feel like they could actually do otherwise. They didn't feel like they did something voluntarily courageous. They just said that, well, I simply did what I saw what had to be done. I felt that this moral urge. Most of these people are also ultimately, at least in this case, religious. So they would oftentimes say that they felt that it was just their God-given duty, that this is what somehow I was put in this condition and I had to do it. So you see, this voice of conscience is also very powerful. If one can follow it, it can also lead one to do things that are much greater than you can just do by yourself. Because it's not just you're just simply acting, understanding there's now something bigger than yourself at play. And in that way, also the best of humanity has also oftentimes been portrayed in these specific conditions. So, fascinating, huh? That is the human condition. It can either go so much to the left or so much to the right, so much either way. And part of spiritual life then ultimately is trying to go for the light, trying to tap into this power and then to also abide by it. Now, how then do we cultivate this conscience? Just like any human ability, we're all born with a certain amount of it. Like intelligence, we all have a certain amount of intelligence. But by practice, you can get better. Like we all can do a little bit of mathematics, but if you go to school, you get educated, become greatly enhanced. So similarly, this moral conscience, at least from the ancient perspective, is something you can practice. It's like if you practice it, you get better. And the more you get better, well, then better results are there. So we see that conscience, at least in the Vedic sense, it is something that runs on principles. So we see right or wrong is always something about principles. Like, for example, something like stealing. There's little theft and there's big theft. But theft is theft. And something that starts very small, it can develop into something very big. So we see that in all religious or spiritual teachings, when they speak about right or wrong, it always is about certain principles. So that is an important first part to understand, that when it comes to the conscience runs on principles. It doesn't judge things in individual aspects. Like if you steal in one context, then you're going to. If a big thief, a small thief can one day become a big thief. It's just about being in the right time, in the right place. So that is an important first part to understand, that in cultivating our conscience, that we have to decide our principles, the principles that we have to follow. And a big part of that then is obviously a large part of ancient spiritual literature would always go back to that, to try to educate our understanding of what the principles are. What are the principles that are worthwhile to follow? What are the principles that give good results? For example, in yoga, so many people do yoga nowadays, but the first two pillars of the yoga process is what is called the yamas and the niyamas, which is basic moral behavior. Like non-possessiveness, honesty, non-stealing, always speaking the truth. So there's certain of these basic moral principles that these things, the more one can imbibe them, they provide the basis. They provide the basis for any kind of meditation or spirituality or any higher experience that you have. It has to stand on this basic foundation of things like truthfulness, austerity, compassion, and what's the other one? What's the 4 pillars of Dharma? Cleanliness, yes. Purity, purity, cleanliness, socham. So that is why the first step, as we said, is literature, to hear and to read. Now, in the Manu Samhita, which is what is called one of the Dharma Shastras, or one of the texts in the Vedas that specifically deal with the science of Dharma, it's saying that Dharma has 4 sources. The womb of Dharma, the origin of morality, is rooted in 4 things. The first is in scripture, the Shastra, so in the teachings, the actual knowledge that is there. The second is in the conduct of the great people. So that is another thing. We see also, you learn through certain people's lives. When you see it in action, then you're like, wow, then you get a clear idea of what it means, Like by associating with people that have great character, or by reading about them or hearing about them, there's a lot of power in that, So these people become your role models, and you live your life in reference to them. It is automatic. See, we are hardwired to learn like that. And like if you look at a child, children automatically just imitate the people that are around them. So that's how we learn. That's, for example, why a kid, you don't have to teach him a language. He just has to be around people who are speaking that language, and then he just automatically absorbs it, just like a sponge. He just takes it all in, and before he just starts to speak it. But he gets way more than just your language. He gets your whole state of mind. The kids absorb. So, and as we grow older, that same principle is still there. By looking and absorbing our minds in other people, then from them we also absorb their values and their character. So to be careful about that. Who are the people that you're looking towards? Who are the people's lives that you are absorbing yourself in? Because you can see we naturally do it. Isn't it like the tabloids? People are addicted to reading about other people's lives. That's what we do. We read about other people's lives. But then we read oftentimes about people that... It's good to read about people you actually want to become like. If you don't want to become like someone, better not to actually read about their life, because what can you get from that? You're going to get the sordid details of people's sex lives ultimately in the tabloids. But there's a better way to funnel that desire to learn about other people's lives. That is to go read about great people, because from them you actually get so much inspiration. The third, what's the third one? The third is in tradition. That's the third source of Dharma. This is also in tradition, because one can see that in human society, in any kind of culture, there's a certain experience that builds up. Through experience, people actually learn quite a lot. So you see, for example, if you go to your grandparents, whatever, they can teach you quite a lot, because they've been through it all. They've been through whatever you've been through. They've done it all. So by taking some shelter of tradition also, obviously tradition can also become vitiated at a certain point. But there is some value, in looking towards tradition. From there we can get some benefit. And the fourth one, interestingly enough, is your own conscience. So there also, how it's explained, it says Atma Tushti, what makes you happy. That also is an important guidance in morality, because to have a clear conscience is the greatest happiness. It's like if you can have a clear conscience, no guilt and no remorse, that is real wealth. Because that is something that you cannot even pay money for. It's like to not have any guilt about what you have done, there's no other way to do it. And if you experience it, you know what it means. So that is a very interesting thing. Even there, you can judge what is right or wrong, especially as one becomes more practiced. Then your own conscience becomes this important guide in knowing what is right or wrong, because you can feel it. And it is interesting how we deal with guilt, because in the Vedic context at least, guilt is something very powerful. Guilt is something that is supposed to spur you on into action. Obviously we will make mistakes. That's what we do as human beings. We make mistakes, we mess up. So many things we do. And then we feel some guilt. And that guilt is just like if you put your hand in fire, then your nervous system tells you there is pain. So that pain, it has a purpose. It tells you that something has to change. So similarly, guilt, what we experience, is supposed to be something that spurs us on into action. If you feel some guilt that you've done something that you shouldn't have done, well, do something about it. Make it right, somehow or other. Somehow you have to address it. And in that way, it becomes a positive transformative force. But we see that the same way that we deal with pain in human society, we also deal with guilt. We just want to numb it. You numb it. Like if you have pain, like you have a chronic headache, if you have chronic headaches, there's something wrong. There's like, you don't just get a headache out of the blue. It means that you're either dehydrated, your posture isn't good, you're spending too much time on the internet, whatever. You're doing something that is causing some pain. So the best thing is to address it, like do something so that the pain goes away. But now what we do is we have some pain, you just pop a pill, just take it away. You have some pain in your back, just go for it, drink something and then life goes on. So painkillers, we have a culture of numbing, So once there's pain or discomfort, you just numb it. This depression, great unhappiness, it means there's probably something, your life, you're not actually happy with your life. So change your life. No, it's too much effort, just take this, boom. And then, so that's what we do. And also, most people are innocent. They just go to the doctor and they're like, please help me. And then we have a culture of just numbing and giving drugs. So the same thing we also do with guilt. So the best thing, the ultimate guilt drug is alcohol. Somehow that's like the preference for if we want to experience this great guilt. Because somehow alcohol is interesting that it takes this certain part of your brain away that is responsible for shame and guilt. And that's what we can see. Like say when you drink, you can just do the stupidest things. And you would never do it if you're sober. Like dancing, like so difficult to dance in public, because you would be so awkward. But then you just take a few drinks and you just let go, because somehow it takes this whole sense of fear or that part of us away. But with it, it also goes. You see also some of the stupidest thing people do is under alcohol. Even Jeffrey Dahmer was interesting because he was a heavy drinker. And most of his things he did when he was drunk, because then he could do it. Because then somehow there's that human part of the consciousness becomes numbed down. So in any case, there's a better way to deal with guilt, and that is to channel it into it somewhat transforming what you're supposed to do and using it as a drive, as a catalyst to change some things. And then, as we said, ultimately, the basis of cultivating conscience is in practice. Like every time that you honor that voice within your head, honor that voice that is telling you what is right or wrong, that you can do it, it becomes stronger. And because you're honoring it. Just like if you ignore it, it becomes weaker. But the more one honors it, it becomes stronger and stronger. And at a certain point, one can clearly hear it. You can clearly hear that inner voice that is trying to guide you to what is right or wrong. It becomes very clear in your consciousness. And it becomes something that really guides you. And then, at a certain point, and this is where it becomes relevant for the spiritual practitioner, is that this ability to honor the conscience, it then also becomes the same channel through which we gain access to divine intuition, to understanding what is the desire of God, what is the desire of the bigger plan, what is the desire that you have to align your life with. That is it's that same channel that you're getting it through. So we see what starts with basic morality, it develops and develops. And in a highly developed consciousness, one gains this access then to understanding, what is the desire of God. So in the Bhagavad Gita then, at the end of the 7th chapter, then it explains how persons who have acted morally in previous lives and in this life, and whose harmful actions are completely eradicated, they are freed from the dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination, the service of God. Because it is there that the consciousness becomes very clear. And there's not all these different voices, but there's one crisp, clear understanding of which direction to go to. And then life becomes very powerful. And then one becomes also, even while one is in this world, one becomes an individual that can make a great difference to the world. Because then you again become an example for others to also start to attune their life with this Dharma. Okay, so that was a few reflections on moral intuition. Now, obviously, it's a big topic, and we can do so much, but on a Tuesday night, we try to compress it all into 50 minutes, and sometimes we're more successful than others. So we have an opportunity for some questions, or some answers, or some reflections. Yes?
Is the conscious created, or is it there from the beginning?
Yes. So, from Vedic perspective at least, it's a faculty. Just like certain things that humans can do, for example, language. It's like, it's just part of being human. Any human has it. It's just built into the human body. Is this ability to learn a language and to speak a language. And that's what makes us human. So similarly, the conscience is just like this ability that we have. Now, it can be stunted, yes, it can be broken, it can be underdeveloped, that's a fact, but it's somehow, each human being has that ability. So it's a basic potential at least is there. And according to what we do with it, then it will either become well developed or it will not become so well developed. Anyone else? Does anyone else have some favorite stories of, great people, great heroes, people who have followed the voice of their conscience? We all know so many stories of that we want to share. Yes.
What about the subconscious?
Oh.
Where does that play in?
Let's go Freudian. Okay, so. The subconscious is again something that came from Freud. So we have to understand Freud's idea is very powerful, and it's not, as all powerful ideas, they're powerful because they are correct. Some of them are correct, because we see that it is true. We see that as an individual grows up, he is shaped by what he gets from his parents. And that your sense of right or wrong is different for different people. Depending also on the quality of education that you get from your parents. So Freud also brought in this idea of the subconscious, that we in fact are only aware of a tiny fraction of what is actually in our internal world, which is the ego. So the ego is aware of a certain part, your identity, your personality, but there's a whole host of desires and experiences that are not always open to us. Memory is a very fascinating thing. It's like memory, it's tucked away somewhere. Then it can be brought forward when we try to remember it. But there are certain things that it can only actually be accessed in certain conditions, certain emotional states or certain desires that we push away. Now, Freud's problem, or the lack of his philosophy is, where does it come from? Because obviously he all thought it just stemmed from experiences when we were very young. So he only drew the soul's experience, consciousness, but he thought it only started at the time of birth. But from a Vedic perspective, it's obviously very different, because we understand that many lives. So the subconscious is definitely a fact, because this body, when this body dies, what you take to your next life is not just your soul, but it's your whole mind, your whole memory, your whole subtle body. That same thing travels with you from life to life. And the subtle body is where all these ideas are stored. All your experiences, all your memories, it's all stored in there. And then in your next life, it all goes with you. But only a portion of it is revealed unto you, according to what your karma and your destiny is in this life. So that's why we see some people, they can do past life regression, where they can climb in that thing. They can go in there and they can pull some stuff out. And then you get these ideas and flashbacks about where you were in a previous life, or so many repressed things can be there. So it is possible to access it, but we're only given actually a limited scope of awareness, because we can only deal with so many desires in one life. Otherwise, imagine if you could have memory of everything you've experienced. It's overwhelming. So you're only given a little portion of experience, and then you work with it for this life. But yes, so many things are still stored there, and it will come up again. And it is especially then those experiences from when we were animals, or animal conditioning that is there within us, that can sometimes cause problems. Because as we said, if you look at animal society, there is no conception of morality. And then when you become a human being, that has to be checked. You cannot simply kill someone if you want their property. You cannot do that. So we see that a big part of human society is then to sort of shape that and deal with that. But still it is there within us sometimes, So emotions are then obviously where our emotional life can sometimes be very raw. So that is what the subconscious is. Now, part of spiritual life ultimately is in purifying that. So not just purifying your ego, but actually in purifying when we speak about purifying the heart, which means then really deeply purifying all the various desires that are there, not just the immediate things that are within your consciousness, but even the deep-seated desires that have been with you for so many lives. When these things become purified, then you're on the track of success. And when you meet saintly people, that's what they are. It is people that, they're not just nice, pleasant people who have learned to sort of become very proper and prim because they're nicely educated. No, it's people that have, within their heart, they have become freed from the deep-seated malice or envy that can be there within most people's hearts.
Yeah.
So that's the goal. Yeah.
What Carl Jung calls accepting the shadow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so like you integrate your subconscious, or is it would it be integrating the subconscious into your conscious?
Well, you don't have to hide from it anymore.
Yeah.
You see, it's like if you have undergone great trauma, just like in the body, for example. If there's certain cases where if you take a lot of poison, you know, so say if you eat very badly, you take a lot of drugs, what happens is that your body can only deal with a certain amount. And what it does is it pushes it away, especially into fat, in fat cells. Like it says, smoke a lot of marijuana, until like for 7 or 8 years, you can still pick it up in the fat cells in the body, because that's where it's stored. Because marijuana, the interesting with marijuana is that there's always debate, is it good or bad to you? But the real thing that it hits is not your memory, it's your liver. You know, your liver gets a massive knock from weed, you know, because your body has to, just like alcohol, it's like, you know, it takes a big knock to purify that stuff because it goes into the blood, it has to be cleaned up. So the liver can only clean so much, and then it starts to push it away. It has to somehow put it away in the body because it cannot deal with all that stuff. So then you get this deep-seated poison that sits within the body. Now similarly, if you undergo great trauma, heavy trauma, you see people that can't remember it because they can't deal with it. It's just like such a shocking experience that comes, and then their conscious mind just cannot deal with it, and then it just gets pushed away. And then through therapy, then they have to slowly undergo it. Like they have post-traumatic stress and all these things that happen. You know, so people they completely push it away, but it still comes to them in their sleep or in their dreams or whatever. It tries to break through because it has to be dealt with. So when Freud's Jung is very nice because obviously Freud has very little patience for spirituality or religion, you know, himself. But Jung is interesting because he's then built on Freud's ideas, but he himself is very spiritual. So he sees, he could understand that yes, Freud is correct, but then he builds and elaborates on it. So he's very nice, a very nice person in that sense. He was more thinking also up, not just getting lost within, you know, the subconscious and the bad side of the human psyche, but also in the positive spiritual side. And when he speaks about the integration of the shadow, then that's what it means, is that at a certain point, if you have nothing anymore to hide, then you can become whole. Yeah? So we're not just speaking about traumas, but also about certain parts of yourself that you are hiding from yourself. It's there. So we think it's not there, but when you look at certain instances in human society where law and order has completely dissolved, and then you see what comes out of people, it's shocking. Now, for example, you can walk on the street and you're safe. Is it because people are good? Or is it because they know that there's cameras everywhere? So in a place where law and order starts to collapse, then you see things come out of people and you're like, what is that? You know? Specifically in war cases, or there's another example is they call the rape of Nanjing, I think it's the city called, it's in China, where it was hectic. It was just basically it used to be the sort of the main Chinese city, and then the Japanese came in and took it over, and then basically there was no police. See, there was no social infrastructure anymore to protect civilians, and you had a whole civilian population that was just at the mercy of the military. You know, so people would go and they could do what they want to, and then you see what happens to people if you just let them do what they want, and there's no consequences. You know? Exactly. You know. So the point is that within us, a lot of that stuff is still there. You don't even think it's there, but it's still there. There was even a man here who was painting. He was a painter. He just came to paint our lobby. Very interesting guy, and he used to also be in Vietnam. And then we had an interesting discussion one day about the war there, and he just said, he was very honest about it. He said that there, He said it was horrible. He said that they just killed everything. At a certain point, they were kids. They were like 19-year-old, And he said that they just started to kill everything. Whatever they saw, they just killed it. Women, children, cats, dogs. They just some of them they just started to start killing because there's so much killing around you, and then they just somehow just unleashed this kind of a desire to destroy life. And it took him many years to sort of somehow deal with what happened there, and what he saw came out of himself when he was there. So at a certain point in spiritual life, what happens is that as one properly practices, because spirituality has the ability to really change us, not just our external identity, but the heart, all these things, the desires that are deeply seated within us, if one properly practices, specifically chanting. That's what chanting is really supposed to do. It enters into the ears and it goes into the heart. It completely purifies the heart of any malice that is there, potentially towards other beings. And then as the heart becomes purified, then we don't have to hide from anything anymore. Then even the propensity, or the desire to cause harm, it starts to dissipate. And then you can become a whole person again. Then there's not just this whole part of your identity that has to be hidden. No, you can look at it. Now, even in the initial phases, as one practices, then even if there's something still there, then it becomes tolerable to look at it. So at a certain point of purification, it's not that you're a saint, but at least you don't have to hide from yourself anymore. So that is also quite a nice experience. Like you can actually honestly look at yourself and you say, wow, this is a lot of stuff happening in there. That's interesting, but that's where I am, and then we move forward. But just the basis of it is to understand that whatever is there, it ultimately doesn't really define us. That the soul itself is pure. And even though it has had all these experiences within this world, at nature we are ultimately good. Even the worst of us, the worst things that people have done, the soul itself is ultimately good. And that's why the spiritual aspect is very important. Purely on the basis of psychology, it would be impossible to really become a full individual. But when we understand that there is this aspect of us that is above whatever has happened in this world, and that by nature we are good, by connecting with that again, then a lot of redemption is found in that. Okay, one more question. Nolan.
So the guy who stuffed children and so
Yeah.
wouldn't, because of the soul's journey, would that be his karma, his dharma, is going through and experiencing, doing all that, and going through all the other sides of it?
You see, also have to understand that
You make your own choice.
it's like not that everyone has to at a certain point become a person who puts children into microwave ovens, and that's sort of part of the natural course of life. No, you yourself decide where you want to go and how deep you want to get into it. So it's not necessary to go there. And also most people don't. You see, most people actually, most of our purification, emotional purification, is actually just in our relationships with people. There you deal with a lot of anger and irritation and whatever it is. So that's also interesting to understand that we, in the West specifically, we have this idea with families or family life or romantic relationships or whatever. We think that these things are there to bring us joy. And they do bring joy. But ultimately, it is through close relationships that purification takes place. It is there that most of your karma actually gets unleashed, because it is there that you have to practice patience and tolerance and loving and compassion. That's actually where it comes. For most people, that's where it happens. But then for some people that somehow or other become very stubborn or very cruel, then they have to go to a different kind of experience. But as Krishna says, best to avoid. It's not necessary for everyone. Anything else? Okay. Okay, we can. So this is like, I didn't have to go this heavy, but what can we say? It's like, it's part of living in this world. Yes, Manish.
So what remedy do you suggest? Like, for example, this guy who he seems like he don't has or have, I don't know, my English is not good, any kind of
Remorse.
guilt,
Yeah. Yeah.
And we all go some small or big things where it's become routine, and then we don't think about that.
Yeah.
So what is the remedy? What do you suggest?
So that is pain. Yeah. It is, as I said before, that the function of pain within this world is reserved for when we have exhausted all other avenues of learning. And then simply by experiencing the same suffering that you inflict upon others, then at a certain point it breaks through. Like I said, that's the example of that friend of mine, that he was a bad guy. He's a murderer. Stabbed a guy straight through the neck. Went to prison. Was in prison so many years, but by somehow repeatedly experiencing the suffering, at a certain point he realized that God, this is how I make other people feel, and then he had this complete change of heart. So it will happen at some point. But for someone like that specific person, it can be heavy. But I have to tell you, it is true. It's even, you see, even the worst people, even people that have done the most horrible things, even there, I promise you that at a certain point, even they can show compassion. It can never die. It is an interesting thing that it can become very covered over, but still at a certain point it is there. I mean, you've had examples of, sometimes even like heavy serial killers or whatever, and even sometimes they can just be merciful to someone and just decide that. I was reading some other interview with one person, and he said, yeah, there was a person, there was the exact time, he could have done it, and somehow he just looked at the person and decided, no, I can't, not this one. This one I will not kill, So somehow it is always there, but it depends. So, but if people have repeatedly, if suffering can do that to us. But again, the more we work with the process, it becomes much lighter. Because tonight we focused a little bit more on that aspect of life, but also we have to understand, equally as powerful as difficulty to purify us is happiness. See, happiness is actually more purifying than suffering or pain. If, for example, if you can see other people happy by what you have helped them with, that purifies the heart way more than the negative side. So for most of us, it's also wise to invest in that. Like if you would invest in doing something to make other people happy, that hits you way more. And then you realize, God, this is so worth it, It's so worth it to actually be compassionate and to be caring, because you see that somehow you contribute to other people's happiness. So that is the sane way to do it, to somehow or other also extend ourselves for others. But for those who don't want to do that, then you can learn in the difficult way. Okay. Any last questions? I thank you very much for listening, for your kind attention, and we will now move to the next part of our program. But before, if you want to stay connected, we have a nice WhatsApp group. You can send a message to that number if you want to be on our events broadcast, or you can like us on Facebook and share, and it'd be nice to see you again here. The next part of our program is a wonderful dinner that has been cooked with great love and care by Chiranti, and also she was our assistant today, so it's going to be wonderful. A prep chef, that's it. So you can sit peacefully, we'll serve it out, and again, thank you very much for being here with us tonight.